I think it's safe to say cyber is everywhere. When I think about the things that keep me up at night, cyber is on the list more often than not. And not just because that's what I do for a living, but because it's so prevalent and impacts us all on both a personal and professional level. Welcome to the Resilient Podcast, where we feature resilient leaders, real insights, and unfiltered stories. My name is Deb Golden, and I'm the U.S. leader of Deloitte Risk and Financial Advisory's Cyber Risk Services practice. And I'm so excited to be hosting a new series on the Resilient Podcast featuring my favorite topic, cyber. And also, I'll be sharing female risk executive stories that are breaking boundaries in the cyber world. I'll be talking with Trish Pierson, Information Security and Risk Management at AbbVie. She's also now the current Deputy CISO.
What is your risk tolerance level, and are you able to maintain that? How do you communicate those risks back up to senior leadership so that they're bought into it? And how do you make sure that you're providing the right level of visibility without instilling fear?
I'm really looking forward to sharing her unique perspective on cyber with her background in engineering and audit, just to name a few. It's amazing to hear the impact life experiences can have on your perspective and leadership style, and I think you'll find Trish's background and what I call grit truly inspiring. Whether you're in the cyberspace or not, I think you're going to learn a lot about cyber, how you can carve your own career path, even if unconventional, and what it takes to be a resilient leader. Well, let's get to it, my conversation with Trish Pierson. Hi, Trish. How are you today? And thank you so much for joining me.
I'm great, Deb. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have this opportunity to talk with you.
Excellent. We've got so many things to talk about, and obviously we want to dive deep into cyber. But before we get there, maybe we can start a little bit about getting to know you and so the audience can understand where you come from. We were talking earlier, and one of the things that really got me excited was about your fondness for rescuing puppies, particularly because the listeners may have heard last time in my podcast that one of the things I love to do in my spare time is to train service dogs. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about your puppies.
So about 2.5 years ago, my husband and I rescued a little small pit bull. His name is Karma. He's the cutest little thing that you would ever see and very docile. And, over the course of time, we've done a lot of volunteer work with different rescue shelters and do a lot of donations with shelters. And we decided to adopt a second dog, which we adopted last week. And her name is Tink, which is short for Tinkerbell, which you would not expect because she's a 50-pound pit bull now, right? So, you'd see this big black dog walking down the street and then you say her name is Tink and everybody goes, Tink or Tank? And we're like, no, it's not Tank. It's Tink. But it's really great to have rescues. I know some people don't love rescues, but they're just so happy to have a home and so grateful to be out, and they're just so loving and are just a great part of the family. So it's something that we really appreciate having, and we're hoping when we get older and in our future years when we retire that we can actually become foster parents, for different dogs, so that they don't have to stay in shelters.
Well, that's wonderful. And I thank you for doing that. I often laugh at my own service dogs. My first service dog's name was Cedar, and the current one's name is Todd. And people usually stop me and they're like, Todd? I'm like, yep, Todd. And so I don't think people are expecting to have a human name for a dog. So I can definitely appreciate Tink for a big pit bull is probably not something people are expecting. So thank you for rescuing those puppies because they absolutely need a home. So good to you for your second one as well. So thanks for sharing that story. As we get to know you a little bit more and we look at the various roles that you've had throughout your career, many of which obviously helped to shape your journey and where you are today, can you maybe share a little bit about what initially interested you in pursuing perhaps your degrees and how you landed ultimately in the world of cyber?
Yeah, so I would joke it's been a very long and interesting journey that I have had, and I don't know. I know we were talking yesterday a little bit that I've had a traditional path into cyber. So I started my journey in college. I was actually a mechanical engineering major, which is very different than what I'm doing today. And I think what really pushed me into moving into the career that I chose was when I got out of college. I had a lot of different options, right? They wanted me to go into sales potentially from an engineering perspective, which I did not want to be a salesperson. I thought about going to Detroit and working in the automotive industry because then I could design a car, right? I had this great idea that I was going to design a car, and I interviewed, and they're like, you can design this gauge that goes on the dashboard. And I'm like, but the car. And they're like, the gauge. They're like, no, that's not what I want to do. So I decided to take a step back. I went and got my master's in business administration. I'm here in Chicago. And then I ended up going into consulting back at Anderson Consulting before it became Accenture, and started working their SAP practice, which was very interesting. I know uh, you being a consultant understand consulting years are kind of like dog years, right? You
They
know,
are
one is the
100%.
equivalent of seven. But it is great to, I think, start your career in consulting because you get visibility across a number of different um, spaces, and you also get to work across different business processes, right? So you really get a lot of experiences in a short period of time, which I think helped me. And I think I was at the early wave of SAP back when
Mm.
it was first being rolled out here in the US before it became as pervasive as it is today. But it gives you a good foundation across the enterprise, understanding how all the different functions work together across the business. So I did that for a little while. I actually then left consulting, moved into industry, and started doing business consulting from a financial systems perspective, which again is a great foundational component to a career because all companies run on finances. And if you can speak to the finance people, they can help you in ways that you can never even imagine. Um, Moving from there, I actually took an opportunity in Boston and worked in Boston for a little while at a small semiconductor company and managed all of their sales and marketing programs. So I got to go to national sales conferences. I was able to work with the outside sales force, and had an opportunity to implement solutions again, kind of at the cusp of when they were coming out. So I worked with Salesforce to implement some outside sales tools. Did a lot of customer relationship management activities and really kind of changed the dynamic of that organization for how they dealt with individuals outside of the company. Moved back to the Midwest and worked at a cellular phone provider. I won't say the name, um, which was very interesting because it was just a very different dynamic trying to understand how that business works because I had not been in a mobility or cell phone company in the past. Was there only about a year. Moved down to Motorola back here in Illinois. I went in, I actually was managing supply chain systems for them, which was very interesting because it was my first opportunity to really play in the global stage because I was managing supply chain in the US, Canada, Brazil, and China for the mobility section of Motorola back in the 2000s.
Wow. Before
Uh,
global mobilization was actually really a thing.
when it was right when the technology providers were actually selling everywhere,
Yes.
right, and there was ownership of some of that technology. I did that for a little while, and then I actually started running their e-commerce platform from a program management perspective, again in those same regions. And I joke, I kind of went back into consulting years because when you're working in Brazil, China, the US, and Canada, it's a 24/7
Yes.
operation, and there really were no holidays, there were no nights. It was just continuous, continuous activity, which is again a great learning opportunity, but can be a little tiring. And then about 12 years ago, I came back to what was Abbott at the time. Came in, I managed their quality IT organization within manufacturing operations. So I was managing basically all the quality systems that were not specifically in a lab environment. And I also had a lot of opportunity then to work from an external regulatory perspective if we had individuals come in to do audits of those systems from a regulatory perspective. So that was interesting. Did that for about 3 years. Moved into a business intelligence role, which I can say is a very challenging role. So I give kudos to everyone who does business intelligence because nobody knows what they want from a reporting perspective until they see it. So you can develop things and then they go, it's not what I was looking for.
Yes.
Um, so that was fun. Did that for a few years. Worked on a couple different mergers and acquisitions from an Abbott perspective. And then they announced the separation where Abbott Laboratories was going to be split into two companies and AbbVie was going to exist. When that happened, I worked on the divestiture, which was very interesting. So I co-led that activity for all of manufacturing from an IT perspective. That was fun. That lasted. I stayed on that project for about a year and a half, making sure that we were able to transition and get past our day one activities. And then I was given an opportunity to move over into internal audit for AbbVie and led the internal audit team for all of technology globally for about 4 years. That was a great opportunity. It was a big time of change within the company because we were doing a lot from a systems consolidation perspective. We were also trying to define future state landscapes, and change the audit space to be much more risk focused. It was also the time when cyber really started becoming prevalent within the industry, and all things cyber were much more important from a risk perspective at all levels of the organization, from people actually implementing the technologies all the way up through the board level. So I was in that role for about 5 years, worked very closely with the information security team while I was in that role. And as I started looking for a different opportunity, I was asked if I would come over and help lead the office of the CISO for our then CISO, which would be responsible for a number of things in his area. So my role includes communication awareness and training. So all of the information that we send out to the broader business functions within AbbVie, we run out of my team. We run information security strategy. We do all of the communications with our other information technology counterparts. We run process mapping within my team for the information security team, so helping them to define their processes. And we also run change management. So as we're making updates to what's happening within the area, we help coordinate the transition of those activities across the organization. So it's been a very interesting journey, a lot of different things, a lot of different business functions and roles in my career, but I think that that's been extremely helpful in getting me to where I am, because I have a very broad background, and not necessarily one that is too deep in any one area.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you. I mean, I'm listening. I'm like, wow, I didn't realize this and I didn't realize that when you were talking about not only your career, but how Abbott was spun off, and all the exciting parts that you got to be engaged with along the journey, including your global experience. So, I mean, I'm in awe of all the experience that you bring to the table. And when I listen to that, one of the things when we were talking to people about you, the brand that continued to come through is you really get things done, and you're really passionate about what you do every day. And I hear that just as you talk through your experiences. But one of the things is, what do you think you've done in your career that earns you that reputation, or something that led you to build that brand around you get it done, and you're very passionate about the mission and the things that you're working on?
Yeah, well, to start that, I'm going to give my shout out to my parents, right? I think that all started very young. My parents really ingrained in both my sister and I a very strong work ethic, right? It's you make a commitment, you get it done, right? You outperform, you don't leave anything on the table, right? It's all in. So I joke, even I joke now with my mom as she's retired. There's no trying, right? There's doing and there's not doing, which not doesn't resonate with everyone, right? But it's kind of one of those things you just have to go. I think one of the things that really motivates me in work is making a difference. Here at AbbVie, everything is about the patient and trying to improve patients' lives, right? And we're all very committed here to that goal. So so I have a lot of passion around trying to make sure that we do everything as well as we can, and that we're trying to meet all of our objectives. So I will say I'm a driver, right? I like getting things done. I like making an impact. I like being able to put my brand on things. I think the best example I can give of that I think would resonate with this audience is when I moved into the internal audit role, a few years ago. That risk focus was really aligned on SOX, right? Because that had been what the big risk area was for organizations. And I'm not going to downplay it and say SOX isn't a risk anymore, right? But we have a lot of experience with SOX, right? Most companies that have been doing it a long time. I really wanted to take a step back and say, okay, if we look at this, how can we make it better? What can we do differently that's going to provide more value to the organization, and what's going to resonate with leadership? So myself with my team, we said, there's this thing called cyber, and there's this risk, and how do we look at how we're connected with the rest of the world and make sure that we're doing that in a good way? And how can we look at other things that we're doing and where that risk may be that might be as important as financial risk or that SOX risk? So we really transformed what that audit function looked like in terms of the things they were looking at, right? And just making sure that we weren't just doing things the way they'd always been done, right? So I guess that would be my motivational statement is just because something's always been done a certain way doesn't mean it should always be done that way, right? You always have to look for ways that you can improve and put your own personal mark on what you're doing, and move it to the next level.
No, and I resonate completely with all the anecdotes that you provided there, as well as I think you're probably, as you've gone from various industries, because you've been in, as you mentioned, telecom, life sciences, healthcare, as you've moved through them, as you move through the U.S. to global and back, I'm sure you've witnessed quite a number of experiences there that having this get things done and the passion for the actions that you're doing at those time have really helped you get from one place to another, not just in your career, but assuming, like you said before, just even getting through the fact that there were no breaks in some parts of your career for holidays or time off, because it truly is, a follow the sun, if you will, mentality when you're in other countries, you working all different time zones and things of that nature. So I'm sure it could be pretty draining. And so to be able to have that type of mentality to not only get things done, but be passionate and energetic about the things that you do, sounds like it's really been a major driver and kind of a key themes in terms of how you've kind of progressed through your career.
Yeah, I would agree, right? I think it's about having passion. I think the other thing is I try to make sure that I'm changing at least slightly every few years so that it stays fresh and that there are new opportunities for even myself, right? I think that people should look for opportunities to change roles or to get additional exposures every few years, 2 to 3 to 5 years, so that they are staying fresh and they're not getting stagnant in what they're doing, and that they're having that opportunity to learn. Because again, I'll go back. If you look at cyber 10 years ago, there wasn't a lot there, right? And then you
Mhm.
get to today, and it's everywhere. And then you go to what is it going to look like in 5 years? And I honestly don't know, right? I know that we'll have some of the same things we have today, but the landscape of what's going on could be completely different. You look at, the IoT, the Internet of Things, and what we're going to have to do there from a cyber perspective is going to continue to grow. Sometimes I even get worried, right? The Internet of Things is invaded homes, right? I mean, I can
So
turn my
spread,
oven on
ubiquitous.
from my, yeah, I can turn my oven on from my phone, right? You can start your washing machine. It's like, some random person trying to, flood your house with your washing machine. Who knows, right? It's just it, the possibilities are endless at this point with what could potentially change or what the landscape is going to look like.
Yeah, I completely agree. And so on that note, maybe we'll shift gears into the cyber world. And you said it, and we certainly believe it. Cyber is absolutely everywhere, and not only is it everywhere, it's really becoming everyone's responsibility. When you think about how available we are making technology, how available we're making data, information is becoming more and more and more. So when you start talking about all the different capacities that cyber and information and technology are enabled, as well as overlay that with policy and regulations, and let alone just people, right? People want to post pictures, people want to chat online, people want to do e-commerce, because of where we are in today's day and age. Cyber is truly, like I said, not just everywhere, but it's everyone's responsibility. And so when you think about you and the roles that you play in your organization and really being an advisor to individuals, particularly as you look at not only your day-to-day role, but also your new role as it relates to your deputy CISO. Congratulations on that, by the way. Curious how you're working to get greater access to the executives in the C-suite. We hear more and more that cyber not only is no longer only or solely, I should say, a technology challenge, it's really being elevated to the board and the executive. So I'm curious what you see from your vantage point in terms of integrating into the broader leadership, if you will, of your organization.
Yeah, I would say our senior executives are very interested in what's happening from a cyber perspective. I think we've done a great job educating them to the risks and the activities and kind of what's happening. in the broader ecosystem of cyber. In our awareness campaigns that we do run, we don't run them with just a work focus, right? We run them with, how can you protect yourself in your personal life, right? How can you protect yourself at work, right? How can you protect your family? So we try to hit all aspects of where they can protect themselves so that they just become more holistically aware, right, of what's going on in the world and different ways that things are going to happen and that they could potentially become, I hate to use the word, right, but victims, because we don't want anyone that's an employee here at AbbVie to become, a victim of any kind of cyber issue. So so we've done a good job. Our board is really engaged from a cyber perspective. Our executive leadership team is as well. I know we have pretty regular meetings with them. I will joke, right? For my prior role being in audit, I have had lots of meetings with all of the senior level executives talking about risks and ways that we can mitigate risks. And the thing that's great is they are all bought into it, right? They want to make sure that they're protecting, again, the patients, right? The intellectual property of the company, and they understand, right? And help us drive what we need to get done to do those things.
Yeah, no, and it's really great that you've been able to educate, I mean, not only the organization, but obviously also the board. I mean, we are getting and hearing many more organizations' interest in what is cyber, how do we do it, why do we do it, what's our response? And the great news is the education that you've done in informing the leadership and the board to understand why that's critical. And obviously in life sciences and healthcare industry, there's many hot topics there, whether that's around IP or access to sensitive customer data, certainly something that's critical. I guess one quick point, maybe if you've got a tidbit for others who are listening, how do you help them understand the importance of cyber risk, knowing that there's so many things? I kind of joke sometimes that people get glassy eyed because since cyber is everywhere, sometimes it's a challenge. How do I manage it? What's important for me to know? So, what do you think is most important for the board to know when it comes to understanding cyber risk?
It's a good question. I think, well, so I'm going to try to break it down a little bit. I think the most important thing when you're having those discussions with your executive leadership or with the board is to really, and I'm a picture person, right? Is to break it down into easy components for them. So when I generally describe cyber, at least in my past, right, I use an umbrella. Right. I say cyber is this big thing, right? And you have an umbrella, and each piece of your umbrella is really a different component of it because you have things like incident response. You have kind of, what we call threat intelligence, where you're looking at the landscape for what threats are. We have um, data protection, right? So how do we look at, keeping data safe and making sure data is not going where it's supposed to go. You have things around phishing and social engineering and what does that mean, right? So it's really teasing apart those different components of cyber to understand what they think is most relevant and then driving good stories so that they understand what the potential impact could be to them. And fortunately or unfortunately, there are a lot of great stories that you can find out in the public domain of
Hmm.
things that have happened to companies. And if you can draw parallels, right? So I won't bring up any examples, but if you can take one of those stories and say, okay, if something similar to X happened here, right? Let's think about what the potential impacts could be, or what could happen from a patient perspective or a supply chain perspective or a reputational perspective, and is that okay? And if it's not okay, then how do we want to handle that and make sure that we have the right controls in place to mitigate the risks of those things happening?
No, I mean, spot on. I love the umbrella analogy, and I love the risk prioritization, because I do think that that's incredibly critical, because to your point, there's so many things that you could pull from that all of them could seem scary, and all of them could seem critical and important. And so being able to have that risk lens on top of it, I think is very critical to get people to get pointed and focused, particularly at the board or the senior executive level. So thank you for your visualization, which I was literally thinking of as you were drawing it in your words. I was thinking about it in my mind. So thank you for that. I think you started by saying you didn't take the traditional path. And I would argue that the path that you took is one that more and more people should be taking, because I do think it gives you a variety of different aspects to consider, everything from technology, starting out with mechanical engineering, all the way through to audit and global and now cyber. And so when you think about all the different places you've been, it really does help to shape this viewpoint that you've been talking about, which again I do believe is very critical in the day and age that we're in, when you're thinking about just the vastness of cyber, and how we look at that from a risk perspective. So I certainly welcome the background that you have and the experience to kind of highlight the risk and the need to look at it. That being cyber from a risk lens, so I appreciate that vantage point. And I guess one piece I'll tweak on a little bit, because a lot of people probably were saying, well, how did the internal audit or those aspects help you along the way? And so maybe you could just one quick for the folks that are listening, where do you think that benefited you in this role? Understanding how processes and capabilities work in the back end, did that help you kind of bridge the gap as well, and maybe understanding the business side of cyber?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think so. So I'll add two components to this as well. I think being an internal audit, even though I led technology as a focus, there was a lot of process work and a lot of working with the business and communicating with business leaderships across all facets of the organization, right? So I didn't just work with individuals in technology. I worked with our finance directors, right? I worked with the CFO. I worked with area compliance managers, really more from an ethics and compliance perspective, right? I worked with regional sales managers. So there's just a lot of very broad business conversations that you would have to have and run with. One of the other things that I had the opportunity to do in that role as well, which I think was great, was we did a lot of third-party auditing. So we would work with very specific areas of the business to understand, what their risks were, and then help, build out reviews of some of the third parties that they were working with. So I think that's something we get a little away from within the technology spaces. We understand technology generally, right? We understand how we think our business wants to use technology, but if you haven't really lived in the world of the business, sometimes I think we make a lot of assumptions about what they know or what they think or what they can do, which they can't necessarily always do. Um, Another joke, and again, I won't use names, but when I was in internal audit, you think all of these younger individuals that are coming out of college are completely technically savvy, and a lot of them really are. But there was a girl I was working with who came into the organization, and she was one of our staff auditors. I realized a year and a half into her being here at AbbVie that she didn't know how to set up voicemail. Right? She wasn't an IT person, but she couldn't set up voicemail. So I helped her do that, and you learn these little things along the way where you think things are really easy, right? But they may
Yep.
not be as easy as you think they are, right? Or the experience of working back with the technology team, right, that may not be as intuitive for people outside the organization as it is for people within the organization. So I think, being outside of core IT for a little while actually really did help because it gave me more visibility and more of an appreciation, for the challenges that existed in terms of how we communicate with each other, which I think can get lost sometimes. The more you move around within IT or the higher up you move, because you're so used to doing things a certain way, and you forget that other people have a very different vantage point.
Incredibly appreciative of the vantage point. And so let's shift gears one last time for one of my favorite parts of the podcast, which is our rapid fire questions. And you can elaborate as much or as little as you want to, but basically the first thing that comes to your mind as I throw out some some random questions to you. Um, who I know you mentioned your parents earlier, so maybe who else, one other person who's influenced you or helped guide your career path?
So I was thinking, so I'm going to give two examples, right, of not necessarily people, but events, right, that I think really have impacted me. So I'll start with JFK, right, President
Mhm.
Kennedy. I think his action of doing the moonshot is really inspirational, right? It's taking something that no one had done before and saying we're gonna do this, right, and really demonstrating some great leadership qualities where people wanted to get there, right? And I think that's something we can all take inspiration from in terms of, how do we build that vision that people can get behind and that they actually get behind it. And then staying with my moon theme, right? I'll go with the also go with the Apollo 13 engineers, because I'm a problem solver. I love solving problems, and the fact that they were able to, for those of you who know the story, were able to take the square vent and get it, or the square filter and get it into the round filter, right? So that the astronauts could make it safely back to Earth, with using only what they had in the spaceship, I think showed incredible ingenuity, right? So having a vision and being a problem solver, if you can put those two things together, you will be very successful.
I should literally just drop the mic now because that was phenomenal. And I have so many more questions. So I'm going to keep asking you questions, but that was definitely a drop the mic moment. I love, 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 love that response. So why don't we go with one around, obviously as a female in cyber myself, I'm often asked about challenges of being in a male dominated role. I'm very fortunate to work in an organization that promotes diversity and parity, not just in terms of, gender or ethnic background, but also all of our backgrounds and diversity of thought. And I find this to be, an enormous benefit as I think about my own path and careers. But of course, we live in the world that we live in today, and we certainly have challenges across the board. And so I'm curious if there's any specific challenges or words of encouragement you would have for others out there, again, listening to this podcast, hearing your story.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, right? I think a lot of companies are very inclusive at this point from a diversity standpoint, and I've been very lucky in my career to have a lot of people that have supported me, right, and given me a lot of encouragement. I think the most important advice we can give, other women that are developing their careers is, be confident in yourself, have an opinion, don't just accept the status quo, and make sure that you don't always have to be right, right? Um, you can fail. It's how do you learn from that failure and how do you pick yourself up and move forward, which is what's really important. I would also say, find people in your circle that are going to support you and give you good advice, and not just tell you what you want to hear, right? Challenge yourself and make other people challenge you as well.
And that's a great lead into my next quick fire, which was, what would you showcase as your leadership style? Obviously, you manage a number of employees up and down and sideways. What would you say is your true leadership style?
My goal is to empower the people that work for me. I try to build a team that I think, is very high performing and is very capable of doing their roles, right? So I put a lot of trust in the people that I work with and that work for me, and I think that helps them from a development perspective in terms of taking things, owning them, and driving them to completion. So, I try to give people a lot of space and a lot of leeway to make decisions and to move forward. But, letting them know that I'm always there to support them or help them brainstorm through things, which I think is really important. Providing help when they need it, but giving them the encouragement and empowerment to go do it by themselves when they feel comfortable.
I would love to work with you and for you, given all the commentary that you've just provided. And we'll end with one last question, as I am picking up the torch for Mike Kearney, who typically leads these resilient podcasts. And so his one of his favorite closing questions is, how do you define success? And I ask you that question, which, by the way, I loved your last response to, we don't allow ourselves to fail often, and give ourselves the credit and the time to fail. And so I'm curious, if you were to say, okay, how would we define success? What does that mean for you? If you could provide that maybe as our takeaway and true drop the mic moment.
Oh, hopefully I can make it a better one. Uh, I would define success as leaving something better than the way you got it, right? Leaving your mark on things or feeling good about what you accomplished, right? And knowing that you learned something as well. I think that's what really defines success, right? Are those couple of things, and if you can do that, I think you're going to be happy with your role. You're going to be happy with the people that you work with, and you're going to be able to continue to advance your career.
Well, Trish, I would tell you that the entire conversation has been a drop the mic conversation. Your experiences, your journey, your evolution has been incredibly amazing. I appreciate you sharing that with me today. And I certainly actually was jotting down as we were even speaking some of your key quotes and mantras. So I will be leveraging them as well as I move forward in my own journey. So thank you very much. And to our listeners, a huge round of applause for you and everything that you shared with us today. So thank you again.
No, thank you very much. It was great talking with you, and I'm sure we'll catch up more hopefully soon.
What a great conversation today with Trish Pierson. I'm not sure about the audience, but I was definitely taking notes throughout that. Everything from her journey to her experience to her anecdotes around life and experience that's helped shape her own journey. So I'm truly excited by what I heard today, and I hope you are as well. In addition to that, I'm really thrilled to be speaking with more amazing women as we look to feature them in upcoming cyber episodes. If you like what you heard, stay tuned for more discussions with cyber leaders and to hear from some new hosts as we expand the podcast to also feature chief audit executives, chief risk officers, and other executives across the board. Be sure to check out additional episodes on your favorite podcast channel and subscribe to our podcast at deloitte.com/us/resilient. And feel free to connect with me on Twitter at Golden Hokie. That's GO1DENHOKIE. And be sure to ask me what that means. I'll be happy to share. So again, thank you so much for listening. We truly appreciate it.